To get started, welcome everyone to this Verivest educational series. Today we're going to focus on introducing our new system Uncat and the idea of taking the frustration out of cash support. Before we jump into that, I want to introduce a few folks. My name is Chris DeLapp. I'm the VP of Operations here at Verivest, and I'm joined by Elizabeth Brooker, who's our Administrative Coordinator, and Christine George, who's our Fund Controller. Elizabeth, if you can go to our agenda slide, I'll run through that. So we just completed introductions. We'll have Elizabeth run through what Uncat is and how to use it. Then Christine will go through our cash process and cash support, including non-cash support, and we'll end with a Q&A. And as a reminder, at the bottom of your screen, you'll see that there is a Q&A button. If you have any questions, please, I encourage you to ask them there and we will address them at the end. Additionally, this webinar is being recorded and will be available on the Verivest Support Center, and we'll email it out afterwards so that you'll have access to the information. And with that, I'll hand it over to Elizabeth to get us started.
Thank you, Chris. As you said, I'm Elizabeth. I lead the team responsible for requesting the support needed by the accounting team. In the past, we've tried sending these requests through email or Ignite links to Excel workbooks, and based on your feedback, we are excited to introduce you to a different way, Uncat. Uncat syncs with QuickBooks Online to display the transactions it needs support and allows easy updates for each transaction. The process is simple and intuitive. You go to your Uncat dashboard, you update each transaction, and you save. Sounds really simple, but how does it really work, right? 3 easy steps. Step 1. Uncat will send you a magic link to your dashboard every Friday. You just click the link to access your Uncat dashboard. If you have multiple funds, you'll receive an email for each, but you can access all of your funds from the same dashboard. Step 2, upload the support for each transaction, either by file selection or drag and drop. After the support is attached, you update the description. It's important to ensure that the documentation is attached first, because once you've updated the description and saved, the transaction will no longer appear on your dashboard. It's sent to your accountant for approval. Step 3, save. That's it. That's the whole process. Once the accounting team reviews the transactions, they can either approve, after which the information and documentation that you provided are synced and available in QuickBooks Online, or they can return the transaction to you with a comment. Let's look at an example dashboard. Each fund has its own dashboard within yours, and all the bank accounts for that fund are included in the same dashboard. And this is what a fund dashboard looks like. You can sort by any of the columns, and they're working on filtering, and affect any of them from the description column over to the save column. I mentioned before that if the accountant has a question about a transaction or its support, they can return that transaction to you with a comment. This is what it looks like when that happens. The comment field will be a darker color and the number of messages will appear. This field allows you and the accountant to communicate about that individual transaction. For example, this comment is asking about the interest rate on a loan funding. In this case, you could either upload additional documentation with the breakdown or reply with the information and click send. With a simplified process comes a few other changes. The first is notification frequency. If there are outstanding transactions for your fund, you'll receive an email with the magic link included every Friday. You'll also receive one if or when there are non-cash reports needed for the month. The second change comes with how and when you'll provide documentation. In the past, some have chosen to provide support in advance by either email or by uploading to Ignite. Since the documentation for each transaction will be attached to that specific transaction in Uncat, we're asking that you keep all the support until that transaction appears in Uncat. For those funds with accounts that sync with QBO, that will be the same day it appears in your bank feed. For accounts that don't sync, new transactions will be uploaded by Monday each week. This process will also change the way we use Ignite. So moving forward, as transaction support will be attached in Uncat, there shouldn't be a lot of need to provide documentation outside of that. Should you need to, however, we ask that you upload only to the financial support folder, which has recently been added for each manager and is located in either your Ignite root folder or the opportunities folder. Our staff will then move any submitted files to the appropriate folder after they're reviewed. This change will help us quickly identify anything that you've uploaded and submitted and help you know when your submitted documents have been reviewed. Additional benefits to the new process include 24 access to your outstanding transactions, especially for accounts that sync with QuickBooks Online. So you can choose to either use the magic link that's sent to you to access your transactions, or you can go to your settings in Uncat and add a password to be able to access your dashboard from anywhere. And you can even add a cell phone number and choose to receive notifications and make updates on your phone if you like. You can also control your cash contacts from your settings page, add, remove, or update coworker access, or assign them to a specific bank or payment account. I've mentioned this a couple times, but another benefit is that the information you provide, including your attached support in Uncat, then syncs back to and is available in QuickBooks Online. That means that when you have an audit request a year after you've provided a piece of documentation, you can go back into QuickBooks Online, access that specific transaction, and see the support that was attached instead of trying to remember which Ignite folder it's in. One of the biggest benefits to the new process is the improvement in communication and transparency. You can easily see which periods have open items and what those items are. You can communicate with your accounting team on specific transactions without having to worry about updating Excel spreadsheet columns or which spreadsheet are you supposed to use. There's even a way to request and provide non-cash reports and communicate individually about them. For non-cash requests, we'll use the Request tab on your Uncat dashboard. As you can see, there are 3 tabs available: Accountant Chat, Transactions, and Requests. The Accountant Chat is intended for general communication, not transaction specific, but we encourage you to use instead your Verivest distribution list and email your general questions there. That way, all members of your Verivest team receive the information. The Request tab is where you'll find an individual listing of each non-cash report needed for that period. As with transactions, you can use the message field to send comments about the requested reports. Here, you'll attach the requested report and save. You'll see a waiting on approval status under the action column until that report is approved by the accounting team. Once your transactions and requests tabs are cleared for the period, you know you've provided everything requested. So we've talked a lot about how and when to submit support. I'm going to pass it off to Christine now to explain what we mean when we say cash and non-cash support.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Hi, everybody. I'm a fund controller here at Verivest, as Chris mentioned. We're going to start talking about what makes support ideal. So there are, a few criteria we came up with here. The first is pretty obvious. It ties to your bank deposits and or disbursements. So your income and expense items through your bank account should tie to the support that you provide. Support should provide all the needed information for us as your accountants to record a transaction. So that includes entity name, dollar amounts, counterparties, in the case of a loan, stuff like interest rates, loan principals, relevant time periods, and so on. The support should be accurate, clear, and concise, and it should not contain any conflicting information. So for example, if you have a loan funding and you have one promissory note that gives a loan principal amount of $500,000, then you have a funding sheet that tells us it's $550,000, you would have some questions, right? We want to know, what is the actual loan principal? What are you accruing interest on, etc. So that's basically what makes support ideal. Now, why does it even matter, right? Why should we have ideal support? There are a few reasons we came up with, and there could be more. The first is, as Elizabeth alluded to earlier, better audit support, a better audit trail. So whether your fund goes through a financial statement audit officially or will in the future, or does not, it's always best to have good support tied to each and every transaction so that down the line, when you have questions or others have questions about it, we can clearly tell you this is exactly what we had, and this is how we support the amounts that are recorded. It allows for efficient recording of transactions, reducing multiple follow-ups to get clarity in items. So in the previous example I just gave, right, we saw 2 different loan principal amounts. We had to follow up with you to say, well, which one is it, and so on. We want to reduce that as much as possible. It allows for more accurate reporting, and it reduces headaches down the line. I mean, sometimes you get questions, 2 years after a loan is funded or investment is made, asking, well, how did you record this? And all we can tell you is, well, this is the email you gave us, or this is what you said at the time. It's much better for all parties involved to have really good supporting documentation that can back up every transaction. So that's generally why it matters. Now, a question we often receive is, well, I don't know what this ideal support looks like. So to address that, Verivest created a repository of common cash transactions and the kind of support we'd be looking for. So how do we find that? Well, you simply start at support support.veribest.com. When you go there, you'll come to a page that looks like this. As a fund manager, you're going to click on the Managers tab on the right-hand side. That'll lead you to another page that looks like this. There's a lot of information on this page. You want to scroll all the way down to the section called Accounting Support. Within Accounting Support, you'll see 5 choices here. You can either choose your fund strategy for a narrowed down list of the cash support that we've created, or if you want to see everything or you're a multi-strategy fund, you can look at the cash support master list, which will give you a very comprehensive list of various transaction types and the ideal support that we have created for them. So that's pretty much how do I find ideal support. We're going to go through some examples of ideal cash support. We'll go through 5, and then we'll talk about very briefly about non-cash support. So our first example. The first example for ideal cash support that we chose is insurance expense. Now, in the case of insurance expense, you should be typically receiving an invoice for your insurance policy. In this case, we've highlighted some key pieces of information that we would need. So the fund name on the top left-hand side, who it's billed to, right? The invoice date, February 28th, 2023 on the top right in this case. The policy term, this is a big one that is often missed. So what period does this insurance cover? Why do we need to know that? Well, simply because as your accountants, if the insurance covers multiple periods, we would expense it over time as opposed to expensing it all at once. Of course, the dollar amount of coverage, so $3,666.25 in this case, and that should match what we see coming out of the bank. And it's good to always have, what kind of policies are included to make sure they're all business related. So that's our first example. I mean, there are many other kinds of cash transactions that require invoice support, and they'll typically look something like this. And you'll find many more examples in the repository we've created online. That's the first one, pretty straightforward, pretty easy. The next one we're going to go to is note receivable and note payable. Now, this also applies to intercompany loans. So in this particular case, what we're looking for is some kind of loan doc. So this is a pretty concise example, but it includes all the information that we need. So we'll start at the top left-hand side, right? How much is the note amount? $2.5 million in this example. What is the date of the note? Again, February 2023. Who is the borrower and the lender? Payor and payee in this example. What is the maturity date? Kind of in the middle there at the top. Payable on or before December 31st, 2025. When does interest start accruing? At what rate? And on what basis? So again, in this case, February 28th, 10%, 365-day year. Now, in many cases, when we get these kinds of documents, we are missing some of this information. Oftentimes for intercompany notes specifically, we're missing maturity dates. If it's payable on demand, you can just say payable on demand. A lot of times we're missing what basis, 365-day year, 360-day year, et cetera. It's best to have that included so that we don't have to come back and ask you. And then, of course, we want to see it executed by both the borrower and the lender at the very bottom there. So that's our second example. Moving on to the third example, we actually give you 2 options. So this is the case of loan payments. Now, if your fund uses a loan servicer, you will typically receive notifications of deposits anytime you have received a loan payment. That'll look something like this. This includes a lot of information, but it's all quite important. So we haven't highlighted anything specific, but you'll see it starts with the fund name, the date of the deposit on the right-hand side at the top there. It gives you the total deposited amount, in this case, $6,030.64, and it gives you a breakdown. In the second half of the support, we see very specific details about each and every loan. So what is the loan number, the last name of the borrower, the property address, when was the payment received, when was it due, and then again, a breakdown. So how much of that loan payment was principal? How much was interest? Were there any fees charged, and so on. Now, let's say you do not use a loan servicing corporation and the fund manager services the loans. Well, what could we get there? So for that reason, we created an alternative support example here. This is something we just put together in Excel as an example and that you can do for your funds as well. And it could just be for the entire month. So in this case, the fund manager is the loan servicer indicated at the top left-hand side. It says which month it's for, in this case, January, which fund, Test Fund LLC deposits. And similar to the prior example, lots of different information about each and every loan. So when was the payment date? What is the loan number, the last name, the address? When was it received? What is the principal on that loan? And then a breakdown of the loan payments. So in this particular case, in the month of January, we see 162,000 total there, 162,960, 64, bottom right. And it says of that total, 150,000 was a principal payment on that third loan for account ZZZZZ, right? And it gives us all the other pieces of information that we would need as your accountants to properly record your loan payments. So that was your second option for loan payments. The next two we're going to talk about are ones that we often find struggles with. So one is loan draws and draw fees. A lot of times when we see these coming out of bank accounts, we simply get a comment, this is a loan draw, and that's all we get. Well, we really need to know a little bit more than that, right? So in this example, we see that for Lender LLC, they have a loan draw. It's related to which property address, who is the borrower, what is the date of the draw, should match your bank account. What is the gross draw amount? $6,000 in this case, in the middle of that example. What is it net down by? So towards the bottom there, you see prepaid interest amounts, a draw fee of $155, a wire fee of $30, and then the net draw amount, $5,805, which will should tie to your bank statement. So unless you guys tell us, hey, this draw amount, $5,805, is actually, net down by all these fees or this prepaid interest, we're not going to know. So this kind of support, which again, you can create in Excel if you need to, if you don't have it already, helps us have very clear and accurate information to record the transaction. This also has the added benefit in this particular example of giving us the new loan balance on the top right-hand side. If you don't have that, we're going to be looking at another kind of support anyway to tie out all your loan balances at the end, which we'll get to in a minute. So that's loan draws and draw fees. The last example is tax payments. And this one is always a little bit tricky. Oftentimes we do not receive sufficient support, so we want to share this example with you. Whenever your fund has a tax payment, your tax CPA should be providing you something that looks like this, where it says for your fund in this example, Test Fund LLC, indicates the year the payment relates to, 2021 tax payments, the total payment amount, $1,097.05, and a breakdown. What makes up this payment? Is it an entity level tax? Are there interest and penalties? Is it non-resident withholding? Now, why does this matter? Well, most fund documents stipulate that for any non-resident withholding, which is basically taxes that your investors have to bear, that should be allocated specifically to those investors. It should not be given to all investors. So in this particular example, if you look at investor number 4, they have no non-resident withholding, it's 0 for them. They should not have to bear the expense of all the other investors who have withholding. So that's why it's really critical for us to obtain this information from you through your tax accountant to record your transactions properly. So that was our last example of cash support. We're going to move on just for a minute to talk about non-cash support before we turn it back over for Q&A. So non-cash support, this can come in many, many forms. We just chose 2 very common ones. So the first one relates to underlying assets. So that's when your fund invests in another fund. The ideal support there is for us to receive a capital account statement for your investment that reflects your contributions, any allocated income and loss for the period, distributions, and an ending balance. It's kind of like what we at Verivest provide to your investors in terms of a capital account statement. Sometimes we don't always receive that. It's hard to obtain. Not all fund managers provide that. So our second best option is for us to receive underlying asset financial statements and your fund's ownership in that entity. That way we can come up for ourselves with the allocated income or loss the best that we can. At the end of the year, we'll also probably look for a K1 to confirm fund ownership percentage. Keep in mind, your fund's ownership percentage can change over time if the underlying asset raises more capital and you did not, invest additional funds. So that is something we're always going to be looking for, and they can come in many various shapes and forms. The other example we have here relates to mortgage loan originators, so the lender's statements of account. So for each loan, this should reflect the current period's activity, fundings, payments, and so on, as well as a period end summary that shows all of your loans. So loan number, borrower name, interest rates, maturity dates, paid to date, and an ending loan balance by loan and by loan number. As your fund accountants, we reconcile our records to these LSAs to ensure that we're on the same page about where every loan stands. So those are just a couple of examples of non-cash support. I'll turn it back over to Chris for Q&A.
All right, thank you, Christine and Elizabeth. As a reminder, folks, if you have a question, you can put it in the Q&A box. You can find the button at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and we'll answer that for you. I did receive a couple of questions during the course of the webinar, and so I'll ask those now. We have one about how do invoices end up in AP if the documentation isn't provided until they actually attach support to cash transactions?
Christine, would you like to take that one?
I can try to take that one. So, I mean, I guess it depends if you're using the AP function in QuickBooks Online. Not everybody uses that. If you are going in yourself and adding invoices into QuickBooks Online, they're going to be there, right? We're not going to get rid of them. Nothing's going to happen to them. For most of our clients, they're not actually paying bills through QuickBooks Online. We are just using QuickBooks Online to record their expenses based on invoices they provide originally offline through Ignite, but now through Uncat. I hope that answers the question.
Perfect. And if it doesn't, feel free to submit another question for clarification. We have another question here that said, you said once I hit submit, the item will disappear in Uncat. Can I see a list of the submitted items within the system?
Absolutely. On the bottom of your dashboard on the transaction screen, there is an option to view submitted or categorized transactions, and you can see everything that you've submitted.
Great. I received a notification that I received a reply to a message, and when I went in to see the comment, it takes me to a main dashboard. Is there a way for me to be directed to the conversation and not the general board?
I actually have that same request and have submitted it. There's an Uncat feature, dashboard feature request button kind of at the bottom of the screen, and you guys are more than welcome to submit as well. They've been very responsive. We've made a few requests. Actually, the drag and drop was one that we requested that they've already been able to do. So we're asking for that. But at this time, I'm sorry, no, it does just take you to your general dashboard.
Perfect. Is there a way to set my own filters or view bank accounts in separate pages? I can only sort by one option, such as date or bank account, not both.
So right now they do just have the sorting. The filtering is something that they're working on. There's a way on your settings screen to set if you only want to see specific accounts, bank accounts, or if you want a coworker to see specific bank accounts. But the filtering right now is still in the works.
Okay. And then are you setting up Uncat access with current users in Ignite, or do we need to submit a new list of users? If so, who do we submit that request to?
I did set it up with the current cash users. The managers, the admins can go to their settings in Uncat and see all of their coworkers to see who has access. You are more than welcome to affect that yourself and change your cash contacts, or you're welcome to send it to me and I can do the same.
Perfect. And then just a couple more questions. Do I have to use Uncat, or can I continue to use our current process in Ignite?
We are switching to Uncat and we are retiring the Ignite process. Based on the feedback that we received, it was much more unwieldy. Uncat is much simpler and the benefits that it offers are just kind of hard to argue with.
Great. And then I think last question here is, what if my support document is missing some of the information that Christine described that makes a good example of support? Will that actually hold up my work until I can get a better example? What would you recommend as next steps?
So, I mean, I think it depends on what it is. If the support does not provide everything we need, we will have to come back to you. So it definitely slows down the process. We won't necessarily stop all work on your fund and just say, okay, we're waiting on new support. So we're going to work with you on that. We do encourage everyone to submit things according to their timeline so that we are not held up in the process. But like I said, it depends on what it is. In the example I gave, for example, like if you have a loan that is missing the basis on which to charge interest, we'll come back and ask you, what is, is it 365 days, 360 days, and so on. If you have a set policy in all your loans, you can indicate that. So it'll be a little bit more back and forth, but we will still do our best, to continue working on your fund, but we will have to wait for some kind of additional information before we can finish your fund.
Perfect. And I'd also just recommend folks that the timelines that were recently rolled out for your funds to make the best attempt to respond in the agreed timeline. So if you said that you would respond within the same day, be sure to try to accomplish that so we don't slow down the process at all. We actually got a couple more questions. What's the cost of Uncat for a new lending fund?
It's included in your contract price.
Yes, so you will not be charged anything extra. And then what is going to happen to the data in Ignite when you retire that program?
So we're not actually retiring Ignite at this time. We're only retiring the cash process through Ignite. All of the folders will remain the same. Your access remains the same. You will be able to access all of the prior information. The only thing that we're really changing with Ignite is we're asking you to only upload to the financial support folder, regardless of where you might have uploaded in the past.
And then actually one more, what do we do if we cannot locate the invite that was sent for Uncat?
Email your distribution list and I'll be happy to send you another invitation.
Perfect. All right, well, it looks like we're coming up to the half-hour mark, so I'm going to end the Q&A there. As a reminder, we did record this and it will be located both on the Help Center, which is the support.verivest.com, and we'll also be emailing it out to all participants and non-attendees within the next day or two. If you do have questions regarding Uncat or the support process, I encourage you to reach out to your accounting distribution list or to your customer success manager, and we'll be sure to help you. Again, thank you, Elizabeth and Christine, for running us through this process, and I hope everyone has an amazing day. Bye now.